You know, I've always been a fan of underappreciated games, whether it be the whimsical Final Fantasy V or the wacky and crazy things you can do in the Disgaea franchise, but no game resonates in my mind like Persona 1 and Persona 2. Don't get me wrong, Persona 5 looks to be great, but part of the charm and draw of it is that it's mixing the best elements of Persona 1 and 2 and Persona 3 and 4. But we're not here to talk about that. Today we're going to discuss why you should play Persona 1 and 2. One thing that immediately catches my eye about these games are the stories and the tone. There's something about these games that feels much more mature than Persona 3 and 4. And no, I don't mean mature and adult like game journals like to pontificate like David Cage or about walking simulators. I mean, there's a clear focus on the narrative, themes, and the tone that makes these characters much more believable and grounded. For reasons such as this, I find the cast of Persona 1 and 2 much more relatable than the cast of 3 and 4 aside from a few people. There is a clear change in focus when moving on to Persona 3 and 4 from Persona 1 and 2. A notable change is the setting and how that setting interacts with the narrative and the characters. All the games take place in high school and revolve around high school students except Eternal Punishment. In Persona 1 and 2, more emphasis is placed on the characters and their pursuit of solving the mysteries and unexplained events as the world unfolds around them. There are no social links or meters that dictate your charm or intelligence like in Persona 3, 4, and 5, so all character development happens organically within your party, and to be honest, I like this design. Seeing all the characters naturally develop within the events of the game, rather than having their deeper meanings tied to a different mechanic, has always been much more enjoyable to me. This isn't to say that social links are terrible, but their design is rather flawed when you consider that in order to complete them, you have to follow a guide of some sort, and they are extremely time restrictive and they leave little room for error. Contrast this with Persona 3 and 4, and they focus heavily on the high school setting and the daily lives of high school students. Persona 4 is often joked about as a Japanese fantasy version of Scooby-Doo, and honestly, I can see the similarities. Much of Persona 3 and 4 resembles that of an anime, specifically a slice of life anime with fantasy elements thrown in. The high school setting is very relatable for the Japanese audience, that's why so many games and so many animes have this setting. Persona 3 and 4 do have darker underlying themes, but they also come off as lighthearted and much more approachable. That's one reason why so many people started with these games, even I'm guilty of that. But the most drastic difference between these games, aside from the addition of social links, will be the focus put on the protagonist. In Persona 1 and 2, the protagonist is just as much a part of the story as the other party members. It genuinely feels like an effort everyone is equally putting in, instead of you being the special one that outshines everyone. This is also supplemented in the gameplay. In Persona 1 and 2, everyone can change personas, not just the main character. Now, it's true that these games were more in line with the mainline Shin Megami Tensei series, but the removal of this as a mechanic is extremely odd. Being able to customize personas for people other than the main character adds much more strategy to the game, especially when it comes to preparing for battles and dungeons. Persona 3 and 4 go out of their way to make it out as you're the chosen one, and Persona 3 tried really hard with that Jesus imagery. The power to change personas in Persona 3 and onward is often referred to as a wild card, and many of the characters in the games are sure to point out how special you are to possess that power. This isn't to say that Persona 3 and 4 are easy, but there is a fair bit more depth in Persona 1 and 2. Persona 5 borrows elements from these games such as guns as a secondary weapon and negotiation. With negotiation, you must coerce demons to your side based off what you say during the interactions. In Persona 1, experience is based off what members you use, so the game encourages you to experiment and try different team combinations. In Persona 1, you must also account for the positions of your characters. Your characters can only hit enemies within their range. Think of Fire Emblem or Disgaea, where you're given a bit more range based off what type of weapon your character has. You can change your party formation, but you have to take into account the limitations of your characters, which adds a layer of strategy and a sense of teamwork, because it's not wise for any one character to do everything by themselves. Guns also make it easier to deal out some serious damage if your character happens to be out of range. Persona 2 does get rid of guns, but it does introduce fusion spells. I will say the removal of guns as a secondary weapon was disappointing, but with fusion spells, when two or more party members use different elements or attributes in a certain combination, they can combine for a fusion spell to deal a massive amount of damage. You no longer have to worry about your character's positions as you did in Persona 1, and while that is a shame, negotiation here is much more fleshed out. Negotiation can have various people contributing to influence the demon, and based on a demon you will get different results, and it's actually kind of funny. Then there's the Velvet Room. It's no secret that each of Persona has a different Velvet Room attendant. Persona 3 had Elizabeth, while Persona 4 had Margaret. However, the Velvet Room in Persona 1 and 2 has a certain charm to it. The Velvet Room in Persona 1 houses Igor, Nameless, and Belladonna. They all return in Persona 2, and the Velvet Room also adds a newcomer known as the Demon Painter. Nameless and Belladonna are found playing piano and singing opera respectively, and it was such an interesting feeling when I found out it was them playing this theme that would become iconic with the franchise. Something else Eternal Punishment does is that it makes the party interact with the Velvet Room both outside and inside the narrative. For starters, every party member in Persona 1 and 2 is allowed access into the Velvet Room. It isn't a place that only exists for the main character. Aside from Persona summoning and management, the Velvet Room is used for story purposes, like when Ulala was taken there during the events of Eternal Punishment to recover from the infection of the Joker curse. I do hope that Alice decides to remake these games one day. They are genuine treasures, and it's sad to see them ignored by the fan base and even the company itself for the most part. I mean, sure, we do have those DLC costumes in Persona 5, but that's the most attention these games have gotten in years. All I'm saying is that whenever Alice decides to make Persona 5 Arena, I hardly doubt we're going to see the crew from the first two games show up and hang around. If you're looking for a nice RPG to hold you over until the release of Persona 5, then I highly recommend you check out Persona 1 and 2. The best versions of the play of these games would be the PSP remasters, on either an emulator or buying them off of Amazon, seeing as how they aren't that expensive. When it comes to Persona 2 Eternal Punishment though, things get a little trickier. The PSP remaster never got localization, so your options are emulation or the PSN store. The word is there is a team translating the PSP version, so fingers crossed. And I can't stress how good these games are. A nice story about a group of friends trying to uncover conspiracies and the world around them. The stories are simple and easy to follow, as well as not going for the typical JRPG tropes with its themes and characters. Thank you for sitting through this long video, and I hope I could perfectly articulate why you should play Persona 1 and 2.